Hello, I'm Shinobu Kitayama. I'm the president this year of APS. It's my great pleasure and honor to give this year's William James Award to Jamie Pennebaker. Jamie is Regent Centennial Professor at the University of Texas at Austin. He's interested in natural language and social behavior, group processes and educational outcomes, and how individuals, groups, and cultures respond to traumatic events. Professor Pennebaker is a Regent Centennial Professor of Liberal Arts and Professor of Psychology at UT Austin. He and his students are exploring natural language use, group dynamics, and personality in both laboratory and real-world settings. His early work on expressive writing found that physical health and work performance can improve by simple writing or talking exercises. His cross-disciplinary research is related to linguistics, clinical and cognitive psychology, communications, medicine, and computer science. He authors many books and articles, and Jamie has received numerous research and teaching awards and honors. So congratulations, Jamie.
Shinobu, thank you so much for that introduction. And also thanks so much for everything you've done for the Society during this last really difficult year. Many of you might not know, but during this time, while engaged in his presidency, he's also been publishing like a madman. He's been doing some remarkable work on COVID and has been able to continue his work on culture and race. We are fortunate to have such a gem as he. I'm also deeply touched by receiving this award. You know, it's interesting for me because years ago when I was a graduate student and a young faculty member, I used to go to talks at conferences much like this one where a senior person would talk, and I always would listen attentively to try to figure out who is this person? How did they get here? And how do they think about science? Where do their ideas come from? And what do they think psychology is going to become in the years ahead? And now I stand back and I'm looking, geez, I'm now that guy, and I'm not sure I know the answer to many of those questions. In any case, I thought I'd give you just kind of an overview of my background, some of the research I've done, and try to address some of these other questions. I guess the most important thing that you're all wondering is how I score on the big five personality dimensions. Okay, I am high on openness, I'm pathologically low on neuroticism, a little above average on conscientiousness, and about average on the others. It might be helpful to know a little bit also just about my early childhood. I'm from West Texas, Midland. It's a place that is completely flat as far as the eye can see in every direction. It's very dry. It gets virtually no rain every year, so there's no vegetation naturally, or very little. And it's about 100 miles to the closest river or lake. The only thing that it has is oil. Growing up in an oil town was so bizarre because basically people would move in, they'd stay there a month, maybe a year, maybe 4 years, and then they'd move on. It was almost as though the wind was blowing new people in and out all the time. So it was a really different social environment. My childhood was basically actually quite fun. I really enjoyed it. I was kind of a Tom Sawyer character. With friends, we would go and chase lizards. We were really big into making fires and explosives. In high school, I certainly wasn't driven to be a psychologist. I never even never heard of psychology, never knew a psychologist, didn't think about becoming an academic. The closest university was about 100 miles from where I grew up. In any case, I went to college at the University of Arizona, and from there I majored in a different topic every semester. I thoroughly enjoyed it, but just wasn't particularly satisfied. At about the same time, a relationship was developing. I was actually in the high school band, and another person in the band was this girl that I didn't like that much. Turns out she liked me even less, and we ended up being set up on a blind date. And all of a sudden I discovered not only was she pretty darn sexy, but she was smart as a whip. And her name is Ruth, and we ended up essentially spending the rest of our lives together. And she continues to be somebody who has shaped my research and my thinking more than anybody. In any case, the two of us, by this time, were a couple, and we ended up transferring to a small college in Florida, Eckerd College. And that's where I discovered psychology. I fell in love with physiological psychology and learning and development, but nothing like social psychology. And I think what intrigued me the most was the work of Milgram and his work on obedience, or Darley and Latané and their bystander intervention work, and Burscheid and Walster's work on physical attractiveness. This whole world was so intriguing because I saw a discipline that dealt with issues that were critically important for the culture, but they were also done in these wonderfully imaginative ways, and frankly, it looked like a lot of fun. So I majored in psychology. From there, Ruth got into law school. I went to graduate school in psychology. And in the graduate program at the University of Texas was thrilling. I worked first with Dave Glass and a remarkable group of students at the time on type A behavior. And after 2 years, he told me that he was leaving. And at the back of my mind, I remember thinking, great, this means I can be on my own. And I ended up being kind of an orphan in psychology, because as soon as he left, I developed my own research team, and I ended up speaking a lot to other faculty, to Bob Wickland, to Arnie Buss in personality, to Dev Sink in physiological psychology, and all of these people and many others in the department really nurtured me into psychology. My first job was at the University of Virginia, and it was there that I really focused on a problem that dealt with the psychology of physical symptoms. How is it that we know when we're hungry, when we're anxious, when we have an upset stomach or a racing heart? In other words, what are the cues that we use? That physical symptoms were very much a perceptual process. And by understanding perceptual processes, we could start to understand ourselves better. Late in my time at Virginia, I started another project. I was trying to figure out what kind of people reported physical symptoms. And in so doing, I passed out a big questionnaire, and one of the questions was, prior to the age of 17, did you have a traumatic sexual experience? What we found was that people who endorsed that item were much more likely to have all sorts of physical symptoms and other objective health problems as well. Why was this? What was it about a traumatic sexual experience? Well, it wasn't just a traumatic sexual experience. It was any kind of trauma that people kept secret. Holding in a big secret was something that was really disruptive. And I started to think about this, that if you don't talk about an upsetting experience, first of all, other people in your social network don't know about it. And so you become more psychologically detached from others. And at the same time, by not talking about it, you probably aren't processing it. In any case, this led me to the next step in my research. It was about this time that I had my own trauma as well. I was turned down for tenure, but I got a job immediately from SMU in Dallas, Southern Methodist University, and that's where I did my very first project on expressive writing, where people were randomly assigned to write either about the most traumatic experience of their lives, ideally one they hadn't talked to others about much, or about superficial topics. And what I found was that when people wrote about traumatic experiences, they ended up showing improvements in physical health. They ended up going to the student health center about half the rate as people in our controlled conditions. So what this essentially meant was that by putting things into words, people seemed to somehow get better. And it was at this time we published that first study, and over the years, other labs started looking at expressive writing, and there was a big battle in terms of, why does it work? And there are several reasons why it works. One is I think it helps people to organize their traumatic experience, so they're able to sleep better, to think better, and so forth. And it also allows them to talk more freely with others. In any case, one of the things that I started to do with expressive writing was try to understand by looking at the ways people wrote. Turns out that was really complicated. And to try to understand people's writing, I realized I needed a computer program that could analyze data for us. And so working with one of my students, Martha Francis, we developed a text analysis program called LIWC, L-I-W-C, Linguistic Inquiry and Word Count. And what the LIWC program would do is it would go in and it would calculate the percentage of words in any given text in terms of the percentage of words that were emotion words or cognitive words, etc. That text analysis work gradually started to take off. And about this time, my friend Bill Swan contacted me from the University of Texas and asked if I'd be interested in a job there. That was one of the few places on earth that Ruth and I would be willing to move, and because we had spent time there, and we were thrilled to be able to come back to Austin. And once in Austin, I started to do all this work with language. And over the years, what we've discovered was, first of all, that the words people use in everyday life really reflect who they are, how they think, how they connect with others. By analyzing language, we can tell if someone's telling the truth or lying, if they are high status or low status, if they're males or females, if they are, what their personality is, etc. But in the last 5 or 10 years, we've expanded this question in a way that I would have never imagined, which is using big data methods, working with people in computer science as well as psychology and other disciplines, being able to track social media, for example. One of my favorites is Reddit. And by looking at Reddit, we can track how people talk in a particular group, but also see how they're talking in all other groups. So if they have some personal upheaval that they're talking about here, we can see how their language bleeds out into these other areas. In other words, here's a new way to start thinking about people and how they are connected and enmeshed with people throughout their social network. This approach I find to be one of the most exciting things I've been involved with. So all of this, going from the very early days of physical symptoms to now to big data, has been really just a joyous time because there have been so many exciting issues and so many questions. So the question is, how did I get here? Well, I've used the I words. I'm now kind of sensitive to pronouns since I do a lot of research on pronouns. But that's totally misleading. What I've been doing is this research, and one reason I've been, what I think, reasonably successful is I have been able to get some of the most unbelievable students in the world. They are the ones that have done all the heavy lifting. They're the ones who have helped shape every idea that I've had. And this has been, I think this is one secret of somebody who's done well, is they have lucky enough to have a remarkable group of students. A couple of other things in terms of kind of big picture. How do I think about science? And I think every person you talk to has a somewhat different view of science. Some people's view of science is very much hypothesis-driven and deductive, kind of a top-down approach, which I think is very defensible. Mine is both a top-down but also bottom-up approach. To me, theories are cheap. Anybody can come up with a theory. A theory's value is in helping us shape a question and then to go in and look at the world. And if the world says, no, this isn't the way that it really works, then dump that theory immediately, come up with a new one. In other words, theories are almost working hypotheses. A related question is, where do my ideas come from? I don't know. They come from everywhere. They come from my talking with friends. They come from my reading the newspaper, reading. They come a lot from my own experience when I see something weird that just doesn't fit. And then just talking with these ideas and how do they relate to other ideas. And one other thing that has become particularly important is the ability to talk to people in other disciplines. I think it's really risky to spend all your time talking with people in your own discipline. It leads to this kind of narrow thinking. Some of the greatest ideas, the biggest grants, the biggest breakthroughs are cross-disciplinary. This last question is, where's the field going? I've got no idea, nor does anybody else. However, pay attention to the culture. What are those issues in the culture that people are thinking about? What are they worrying about? And the ideas are everywhere. So, for example, as I give this talk, we're still in the midst of COVID. This last year has been one of the most remarkable certainly in my life, perhaps in the last 100 years, with a massive pandemic, upheavals with race, issues in terms of extremism in the country. These are all classic social psychological issues and problems. We should be jumping on this like crazy because it's an opportunity to see people in ways we typically don't. So the idea here is go out, look for things that interest you. We're not going to run out of ideas in your lifetime, and there's enough for everybody. So I hope this is helpful. It's certainly been a wonderful ride for me, and I'm really appreciative to all of you for watching, and I expect great things. Bye-bye.